and he does something that's not natural. It's like it would never happen unless God did something. He kind of breaks the laws of the universe, if you would, and just does something miraculous. Like someone gets healed. They're sick, and then all of a sudden God does something, and they're well. How did it happen? Well, it didn't take any medicine. God just healed them. Or when God, when Jesus was walking on the water, how does he walk on water? If I try walking on the water, I sink. But Jesus did a miracle. And so God does things by miracles. But does God do anything else other than miracles? Yes, he does. There's a word called providence. And that means that God is working through just coordinating things that we would never see or say that God did it, but God was behind it. And God works in providence a whole lot more than he probably does in miracles. We only have a few miracles recorded, and miracles are kind of rare. But providence happens all the time. God moving behind the scenes. God bringing someone along that makes something else possible, which makes something else possible, which all of a sudden causes something to happen to you or to me. And then maybe later on we look back and go, wow, I could see God did that. But maybe we didn't see it at the time. It's providence. God working behind the scenes. So as we are entering these chapters here, it seems like we're just hearing history. It seems like we're just seeing, this happened to Paul, and then that happened to Paul, and then this happened, and we just say, okay, I'm following the story of Paul. But I want you to look carefully, because God is behind the scenes, doing things through people that there were no miracles, but you look back and you go, wow, that was God all the way through. And so that's kind of in our story right now as we go through the book of Acts. I want you to look for that, and I'll try to point some things out to you as we go through. But it's providence. God at work behind the scenes, moving, bringing people, bringing situations so that his plan happens in Paul's life. His plan will happen in your life as you look back and see how God is moving. When we left off, Paul is being arrested, okay? In fact, let me just briefly kind of walk you through this just to bring you up to speed again. Acts chapter 21, verse 27. I'm just going to read this so you kind of get the flow of this. Paul has gone to the temple, okay? And he's gone to the temple to prepare for worshiping, really, and meeting with some men. He's going to fulfill his vows, and taking some Jewish brothers with him. Verse 27. When the 7 days were nearly over, some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul at the temple, and they stirred up the whole crowd, and they seized him, shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help us! This is the man who teaches everyone everywhere against our people and our law and this place. And besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple and defiled this holy place." They had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian in the city with Paul and assumed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Remember, the courts of the temple are forbidden, for Gentiles. There was a Gentile court, but Paul was on the inner court where only men could go. Then there was the women's court, and then there was the Gentiles court. Remember, they had signs up there that says, if anybody crosses this court, this fence, and you're a Gentile, you take your life in your hands, you have no excuse, we will kill you. And so the accusation went out. He's violent. He brought a Gentile in here, and Paul's inside there. And so they're going to kill him. Now, these are Jews, okay, probably from Ephesus. Okay, Paul had been in Ephesus, and he taught in the synagogue for 3 months, it said. And many people were converted. He says, but they eventually kicked him out. And they said, the Bible says, they refused to believe what Paul was saying about Jesus being the Messiah. So they threw him out. And then Paul stayed another 2 years, and many, many Gentiles came, but they were claiming that Paul was teaching everything against Jews. It was a false accusation. They said that he had brought someone into the inner court. It was a false accusation. Now understand, the Jews who were in the temple, it was festival time. Paul was there during the Pentecost festival, so there were lots and lots and lots of Jews. Just before this event, just days before this event, Paul had arrived in Jerusalem, and the church greeted him. But James, the leader of the church, says, Paul, there's a problem. He says, many Jews have come to know Jesus, but they have also heard rumors about you. And these Jews who have come to know Jesus are sticklers for the law and following the law. And he said, there's going to be a problem. So we want you to take these guys and go to the temple and just show that you're not really against Jews. So he's in the process of doing that. So I'm guessing that even in the temple, there are Christian Jews among non-Christian Jews, just normal Jews who are following Judaism and going to the temple to worship God. But now this false accusation comes up. And they go berserk. Look at this. It says verse 30, the whole city was aroused, and the people came running from all directions. Seizing Paul, they dragged him from the temple. And immediately the gates were shut, the fences were closed, right? And it says, while they were trying to kill him. Not just throw him out. They are going to kill him. It says that the commander, news reached the commander of the Roman troops. Now, so here's the temple court. And right next to the temple court, going up these steps, overlooking it, is the fort, the Roman fort. There are 1,000 soldiers there during the time of the festival. And the commander's job is to make sure that there are no riots, there are no breaking of the peace in Jerusalem during this time, because Romans, that's one thing the Romans said, you guys can do your stuff, but you better be orderly. And we are not going to let anything happen. All of a sudden the word says there's a riot. The commander, comes running out of there. It says he at once took some officers, meaning centurions. Centurion is a commander over 100 troops. And they brought soldiers, ran down into the crowd. When the rioters saw the commander and his soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. They were going to beat him to death. So he's been beaten. I mean, he's already bruised. I mean, he's hurting. Paul's hurting. The commander gets there, and he came up, and the first thing he does is he arrests Paul. Okay, Paul's innocent. But the commander says, I'm going to stop this right now. The first thing I'm going to put this guy in chains. And he arrests him. He bounds him in 2 chains. Then he asks who he was and what he'd done. Some in the crowd shouted one thing, some said another, and since the commander could not get the truth because of the uproar, he ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. So they're going to haul him up to the fort. When Paul reached the steps going up to the fort, okay, the violence of the mob was so great, he had to be carried by the soldiers. And the crowd that followed kept shouting. They were following them up the steps to the barracks. This is a riot. Why? All over a false accusation. He hadn't done anything wrong, but he was falsely being accused. I want to take a stop here for just a second, okay? We see the story, what's going on, okay? In this term. But I want to say, does that stuff ever happen today? I mean, could a bunch of Christians ever falsely accuse another Christian and end up in a riot? A few weeks ago, Lisa and I watched a documentary on contemporary Christian music. And so they went back to about the late 60s and the early 70s when that movement began. And there were Christian artists who were really basically rock stars, rockers, who got saved. And they began playing the same music, but began writing Christian lyrics. And these guys looked just like they looked before. And there was a couple of churches that actually sort of allowed them to play. One was a Calvary Chapel church in Southern California. And it's like, at first, the reaction of the pastor was like, there is no way, dudes, you're going to come into our church and sing anything. But they heard him. And they thought, well, okay. So they let him come in. And they played their music. They played their Christian, basically their Jesus music. And that was okay in that church. And then over time, that phenomenon grew because the young people were going, wow, we really like this. It speaks to us. We like the music and we like the words and we're getting something from it. And so that began to spread more and more, through California, through, a little bit back east, and time went on and that became more and more popular. But in the Christian church, if you've been around for a while, Christian music is a big contention. It's been that way for many, many years. And I remember when it first came on in the scene, and we watched as this went through, on this documentary, how all these different bands and groups and styles of music began to appear in the Christian world. And it was not very well accepted. In fact, they showed clips where preachers were saying, it's the devil's music. Not going to come in my church. Take your stand. And it was interesting because one of those artists who was had watched this preacher over the years, and it was his favorite. And he had learned and learned and learned. And then he heard on the TV that the guy was actually speaking exactly against his band. Named him by names. And he says the guy was crushed. He was crushed because he'd become a believer. He had followed this man in his teachings and his learning, and he was crushed. A little later on, they told the story of Amy Grant, who became a very popular singer and was very well accepted in many churches. And then she got a divorce. And they pulled her records out of music stores. They pulled, it says, we are not listening to her anymore. A year later, she remarried her husband. They've been married for 20 years. But the church just said, no, we are not having. Not everybody, but it happens. My point is that I'm saying all this is be careful how we judge what we hear. I mean, they went berserk over Paul, but no one ever checked to see if that was actually true. They just reacted, and they were going to kill him. They were going to take his life over a false accusation. Men and women, be careful when you hear stories about people. Make sure that you don't judge before you know all of the facts. Okay? So I'm going to say on that, let's pick up the story again. So it says, the crowd followed them up the steps, and they were shouting, "Get rid of him." No mercy. All the way up the steps. In fact, the soldiers have to pick up Paul, put him on his shoulders, basically, and get him up the steps because this crowd was going to kill him anyway. And they said, when you get him in the barracks, just kill him. Kill him. Verse 37. As the soldiers were about to take Paul into the barracks, they're at the top of the steps now, going into the gate, Paul says to the commander, "Excuse me, sir, but may I say something to you?" I mean, totally opposite of the crowd is screaming and hollering, and Paul says, "Excuse me, Commander, can I speak with you for a minute?" Very politely. And the commander says, "Do you speak Greek?" He replied, "Aren't you the Egyptian who started a revolt and led 4,000 terrorists out into the wilderness some time ago?" I mean, the commander thought he'd finally caught this terrorist. He said, "I know you. You're the Egyptian." Paul says, "No, you got the wrong guy here." He says, Paul answered, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no ordinary city. Please let me speak to the people." After receiving the commander's permission, Paul stood on the steps and motioned to the crowd. Now, they've been beating on him. They've been chasing him up the steps, hollering, "Kill him, get rid of him," to the Romans. And all of a sudden, Paul gets permission to talk to him. He says, "You know what? This is God's opportunity. I'm gonna win this crowd over. I'm gonna tell them, really who I am and how they're mistaken. And God has brought all these people." I'm just speculating now, okay? Because it doesn't say that. And Paul might be thinking, I'm gonna have a chance to preach the whole group. God's made this provision for me. And the commander says, "Well, okay, you can speak to them." And Paul raises his hands, and the crowd quiets down. Unbelievable. 1 second they want to kill him. The next second, they're willing to hear what he has to say. Wow, God's doing something here. Or so it seems. He stood on the steps, motioned to the crowd. When they were all silent, he said to them in Aramaic, in their own language, in Hebrew, okay, "Brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense." Okay, so when they heard him speak to them in Aramaic, they became very quiet. Wow. Interesting. Chapter 22. Okay. Verse 2. Then Paul said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this very city. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. Gamaliel was a very prominent rabbi, one of the two prominent rabbis in the city. Paul says, look, you got me mistaken with somebody else. He says, I'm a Jew. I'm just like you. I've studied I'm a Pharisee. He says, I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. He said, I know how you feel. He says, I felt the same way. He says, I persecuted the followers of this way, that's the name of Christians at that time, to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison. He says, as the high priest and all the council themselves can testify. He said, you could ask them. Ask them who I am. You got me mistaken for somebody else. I'm not against the Jewish people. I'm one of you. In fact, I've been just as zealous as you are today. I was against those Christians. I was, and he goes on, he says, I can tell you, I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem and to be punished. Verse 6, he says, I persecuted the followers of this way to their death. He says, I know what you're talking about. You want to kill me. He says, you know what? I killed them. I know what you're thinking. I know how you feel. But let me tell you what happened to me. About noon, when I'm going to Damascus, he said, I came near Damascus, and suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground, and I heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Well, who are you, Lord? I asked. I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting, he replied. My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. What shall I do, Lord? I asked. Get up, the Lord said, and go into Damascus. There you will be told all that you have been assigned to do. Verse 11, my companions led me by the hand into Damascus because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. Paul says, I was blind. Verse 12, a man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law. Another Jew, a Jewish man, was sent to me. An observer, not a breaker of the law, but an observer of the law. And highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. At that very moment, I was able to see him. Then he said, the God of our ancestors, meaning Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all of those, our ancestors, that God has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear words from his mouth. Right? Jesus had just appeared to him. He said, God chose you so that you would hear the righteous one and see him and hear his words. You will be his witness to all people what you have seen and heard. And now, what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, wash your sins away, calling on his name. He's telling this crowd. They're listening. Silence. He says, when I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance, and I saw the Lord speaking to me. Quick, he said, leave Jerusalem immediately because the people here will not accept your testimony about me. Now, this is like 20 years ago. And Paul, in all his wisdom, starts to argue with the Lord. He says, Lord, I replied, no. These people know that I went from synagogue to synagogue, to another, to imprison and beat those who believe in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing me. He says, they know me. They're not going to be against me. And the Lord said to me, go. Get out of town. I will send you far away to the Gentiles. In the world, there are two kinds of people in the Bible: Jews, Gentiles. The crowd listened to Paul until he said this. They raised their voices and shouted, rid the earth of him. He is not fit to live. What? What did Paul say wrong? You know what he said? He said, God sent me to the Gentiles. You know, we hear a lot of things today, and they're true, about how people hate Jewish people. Anti-Semitism. And it's true. You know, the Arab countries want to kill the Jews. But did you just read what I read? These were Jews, and as soon as they heard the word Gentile, they wanted to kill Paul. Let me tell you, the Gentiles have no market on sin. Okay? The Jews have just as much sin. Talk about anti-Semitism. They were anti-Gentilism. They hated them. He just said the word, and look what it says. It says they started shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust in the air. I mean, they're like stirred up. You know, they're picking up dirt, throwing it up in the air. They're throwing their clothes in the air. Kill him! Kill him! We don't want to hear anything from him. Kill him! If he's going to go to the Gentiles, he deserves to die. You know why? Because they thought God would not bless anyone but them. They had the corner on God. And God was for them only. It's okay if they became a Jew. That's okay. But just to go to the Gentiles? No. Man. There's drama here. There's hatred here. There's spite here. There's misunderstanding here. There's false accusations here. There is evil here. Where's God? Paul thought, wow, this is my opportunity. I'll just give them my testimony. Then they'll understand me. Oh, no, they didn't. As they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks, flinging dust in the air, the commander, this guy, nothing seems to be working him, right? He sees a riot, he runs down, he grabs Paul, tries to figure out, okay, what's going on? People are shouting this, people are shouting that. He goes, oh gosh, I can't figure this out. Okay, let's take him up to the barracks. He's going up the barracks, and Paul says, can I just talk to you? And he goes, well, aren't you the Egyptian? He goes, no, that's not me. He goes, wait a minute, I got this guy mixed up. Who is he? What is going on here? Why do we have all these problems with you, Paul? And he says, well, let me just talk to the people. I'm a Jew. They'll listen to me. So, he goes and pretty much he kind of makes his testimony. And then he gets to the word Gentile, and all of a sudden they go berserk again. And the commander's going, what is going on with this guy? I can't figure this what is these people's problem? He says the commander ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. He directed that he be flogged and interrogated until he could find out why the people were shouting like this. He says, well, they're not going to give me the answer. I'll tell you what, we'll beat him, and we'll flog him, and we will get an answer. We'll find out just who this guy is and what is going on. It just gets worse for Paul. It gets worse for the commander. He can't figure this out. He cannot, as a Roman, he has to have a charge. He has to have a reason to arrest people and charge them. And he can't get the answer. He says, well, we'll just beat him. So there it says, verse 25, as they stretched him out to flog him. Right? Flog is that whip, and it's got all that stuff on the end of it, right? Bones, glass, sharp things. So it's not just that they're going to whip him. They're going to whip him and rip the flesh right off of him. So he's going to tell what's going on. They're going to get their answer out of him. He says, as they stretched him out to flogging, Paul said to the centurion standing there, excuse me, is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty? Oh, he plays the Roman citizen card. Now, this is a big deal, okay? A very big deal. They had no right to arrest a Roman citizen without being charged. They had no right to beat a Roman citizen without a charge. They've already had one violation, almost a second violation, and these are serious violations. I mean, Rome is very strict on this about their citizens. When the centurion heard this, he went to the commander and reported. What are you going to do? He said. This man is a Roman citizen. Man, this commander, he's got troubles. Like, what am I going to do with this guy? The commander went to Paul and asked, tell me, are you a Roman citizen? Yes, I am, he said. The commander said, I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship, but I was born a citizen, Paul replied. Those who were about to interrogate him withdrew immediately. They got out of there. It's like, we're not going to touch this guy. Commander's messing up right here. He's in big trouble. The commander himself was alarmed when he realized he had put Paul, a Roman citizen, in chains. Now, I'm going to just kind of let you know what's going to come, but we're going to stop here. Okay? Paul should have been dead. Okay? He should have been dead. Because if the commander hadn't showed up, he would have been beaten to death, right? If the commander had listened to the people, they would have killed Paul. The commander was going to beat him, flog him, but all of a sudden that stopped. Do you think that just happened by good luck? Was Paul just lucky? Or is God moving behind everything? God, this commander, he's got more troubles ahead, okay? It's going to get worse for him. But God used this Roman soldier to rescue Paul from being beat at the temple. Okay, and God continues to use this Roman soldier to, he was going to beat Paul, but somehow Paul said, I'm a citizen, and that changed the soldier's opinion. It changed what he could do because he is a Roman commander. Do you think that's just coincidence that all that kind of comes together? Where is God in all of this? Seems like God's taking his hands off and say, well, you're just on your own, Paul. Good luck. And a few lucky breaks happen. And so far, he's still alive. Let me read something to you. Just kind of a reminder here. But in Acts chapter 9, when Paul was which is when he just got saved. He came down to Jerusalem, had this meeting with the Lord, right? The Lord said, get out of town, get out of town. Paul says, oh, no, it's okay. In Acts chapter 9, it says he left because the Jews were plotting to kill him. Back in chapter 9. So he takes off. Okay. Acts chapter 13, it says that the Jews drove him out of town that he got to. Acts chapter 14, he gets to the city of Iconium, and it said he was threatened to be stoned. So he goes to Lystra, the next city, and he is stoned and left for dead. Then he goes to Corinth, and it says the Jews tried to kill him and arrest him. Then he goes to Ephesus. It says they kicked him out of the synagogue, and they plotted to kill him. He was going to get on a boat in Corinth, and it said he decided to walk because the Jews were going to throw him off the boat out at sea and kill him. That's a lot of, and we're not done. We are not done. They tried to kill him at the temple. They wanted to kill him up on the steps. They wanted the soldiers to kill him. And we will see they're not done yet. Why isn't Paul dead? Are they just incompetent? Or is God got a plan for Paul? You know what? If God has a plan for you, you're safe. You're safe. I mean, they can plot, they can do whatever, they can try arresting, they can throw you in prison, but if God wants you alive, you're alive. And where is God in all this? Well, he provides by this, by that, by person here, brothers over here, a certain walk in a different direction instead of going on a ship. God provides, God provides. The providence of God is at work. And it's still at work in you. And I want to challenge you this week to look around you and see, well, what is happening? Is God doing something? Maybe God will bring somebody into your life that you never knew before, but I got a great connection there. Really? Did you just get a great connection? Or was God behind that? The providence of God. Psalm 37, verse 4. Reads like this. If I can get there. Nope, it's not 37:4. 34:7. Sorry, my bad. It says, David speaks, and he says, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Do you fear the Lord? Do you follow the Lord? The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him. God promises to take care of us. Okay? We don't have to, lots of stuff happens, right? Lots of stuff happens in our lives. So good things, bad things. But in the providence of God, the things that happen to you are part of God's plan. Good or bad. And if God has a purpose for your life, he will get you through that. Whether you believe it or not, he will get you through that. I mean, how many people try to kill Paul? Paul will eventually be killed. But not until God says so. Not until the plan is done. Let me just close. Lord, help us to look this week, to see around us how you are working. Or maybe let us look back and see how you have worked. And to be in awe of what you do and how you do it. And then let us, Lord, worship you, because we see how good you've been to us. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Go with the Lord, and he will go with you.